Imagine this. You're an early human walking through a forest and you come across a pile of fruit lying on the ground. Not fresh fruit. Fruit that's been sitting there for days, bruised, overripe, starting to rot. Normally you'd walk right past it. But something catches your attention. The animals nearby, birds, monkeys, even elephants, they're not avoiding this fruit. They're eating it eagerly, and they're acting strange, stumbling, slow. Some of them clearly can't fly straight or walk in a steady line. That rotting fruit wasn't just decaying. Wild yeast, invisible, floating in the air all around us constantly, had landed on the sugars inside the fruit and started breaking them down, producing alcohol as a natural byproduct. The fruit had fermented completely on its own, with no human involvement at all. Here's the part worth sitting with. Nobody invented fermentation. It was already happening everywhere, constantly, for millions of years, long before humans existed to notice it. Overripe fruit rotting in the wild has almost certainly been quietly turning into a mild natural alcohol for as long as fruit itself has existed. So the real question isn't how humans invented alcohol. It's how humans figured out that this rotting fruit, the stuff their instincts should have told them to avoid, was actually safe and strangely enjoyable to eat. Some researchers even have a name for this idea. They call it the Drunken Monkey Hypothesis. The theory suggests that our primate ancestors, millions of years before modern humans existed, developed a genuine attraction to the smell of fermenting fruit because that smell reliably pointed toward a ripe, calorie-dense, easy meal. That ancient attraction may still be sitting inside human biology today, quietly shaping why so many cultures, completely independently, eventually decided this fermented stuff was worth pursuing on purpose. And once early humans started deliberately seeking out fermented fruit instead of just stumbling onto it by accident, the next leap wasn't far behind. If fruit left out naturally does this, what happens if you leave out something else? Grain, honey, milk. The accident was about to become an experiment. Once humans noticed that rotting fruit could make you feel strange, in a way people apparently didn't mind, the next step was obvious in hindsight but genuinely difficult in practice. Could you make this happen on purpose, reliably, instead of waiting for the right piece of fruit to rot in exactly the right way? The earliest deliberate fermentation likely wasn't even about fruit anymore. It was about grain. Some archaeologists now argue that beer may be older than bread. That sounds backwards, until you think about what grain actually does when it gets wet and left sitting for a while. Soaked grain naturally starts to sprout, converting stored starches into sugars, and those sugars are exactly what wild yeast needs to start fermenting. Ancient people, storing grain in damp conditions, may have stumbled onto beer-like fermented porridge long before anyone deliberately baked a loaf of bread. There's a famous, still debated site in modern-day Turkey called Göbekli Tepe, dating back roughly 11,000 years. Among the oldest known monumental structures on Earth. Some researchers have found evidence of large stone vats there that may have been used for brewing grain into a beer-like drink, possibly to fuel large group gatherings and communal feasts. If that theory holds, it means the desire to brew alcohol on purpose might be tied into one of the very earliest chapters of organized human society itself. Around the same broad era, in different parts of the world, people were doing something similar with grapes. Fermented grape juice, left in clay vessels, would naturally turn into wine. Archaeologists have found chemical residue of wine in pottery jars in the region of modern Georgia, dating back roughly 8,000 years, some of the earliest solid evidence of humans deliberately producing wine rather than just stumbling onto it. Think about what these early brewers were actually doing. They had no concept of yeast as a living organism, no understanding of sugar or chemistry or biology at all. They were running consistent, repeatable experiments purely through observation and trial and error, refining a process they didn't understand on a molecular level but understood perfectly well through pattern and results. Fermented drinks spread from there into nearly every ancient culture independently. Mead from honey, rice wine in ancient China, pulque from fermented agave in ancient Mesoamerica. Different ingredients, different continents, completely disconnected from each other, all arriving at roughly the same discovery through the same basic accident. Something sweet, left out long enough, becomes something else entirely, but fermentation on its own has a hard ceiling. Yeast can only survive and keep producing alcohol up to a certain concentration before the alcohol itself becomes toxic enough to kill the very yeast producing it. For thousands of years, that ceiling was simply accepted as the limit. until someone figured out how to break straight through it. Here's a fact that sounds almost too convenient to be true, but isn't. The breakthrough that let humans push alcohol far beyond fermentation's natural limit didn't come from a new ingredient at all. It came from a basic property of physics that had been sitting there the entire time. Alcohol evaporates at a lower temperature than water. That single fact is the entire secret behind distillation. If you gently heat a fermented liquid not to a full boil, but to a precise temperature sitting between alcohol's evaporation point and water's, the alcohol turns to vapor first, while most of the water stays behind as liquid. Capture that vapor, cool it back down, and it condenses into a liquid far more concentrated in alcohol than anything fermentation alone could ever produce. Early distillation techniques appear to have emerged independently in multiple places, refined further by alchemists in the medieval Islamic world who were originally far more interested in purifying medicines, perfumes, and other substances than in making stronger drinks. The distillation apparatus itself, often called an alembic, was originally a tool for chemistry and medicine. Concentrated alcohol was, in a very real sense, a side effect of people trying to purify something else entirely. When distilled alcohol eventually reached medieval Europe, people were stunned by what it could do. It burned with a visible flame, unlike anything they'd seen from regular wine or beer. It seemed to have almost miraculous preservative and medicinal properties compared to fermented drinks alone. So they gave it a name that tells you exactly how they felt about it. In Latin, they called it aqua vitae, water of life. That name persists today in surprising places. The word whiskey itself traces back through Gaelic to a direct translation of that same phrase, water of life. An entire modern industry built on a name that reflects genuine ancient astonishment that this concentrated flammable liquid seemed almost supernatural compared to anything fermentation alone had ever produced. Ancient people fermenting fruit and grain had absolutely no idea that buried inside their drink was a substance that, with nothing more than careful heating and a basic understanding of temperature, could be concentrated into something dramatically stronger purely by exploiting one small, invisible difference in how two liquids behave when heated. But let's be honest about the real risk buried inside this discovery. Fermentation and distillation, without modern chemistry to guide them, were genuinely dangerous experiments to be running blind. Contaminated fermentation could easily turn deadly, producing harmful bacteria or toxic byproducts instead of safe alcohol, with no reliable way for ancient brewers to detect the difference until it was too late. Distillation carried an even sharper danger. Poorly controlled heating could concentrate methanol alongside regular alcohol, a substance that looks and smells nearly identical but causes blindness or death in surprisingly small amounts. Early distillers, working purely on instinct and experience, had no scientific way to separate a safe batch from a genuinely lethal one. And once people understood how to concentrate alcohol far beyond fermentation's natural ceiling, an entirely new set of consequences arrived alongside it, consequences societies are honestly still grappling with today. Concentrated alcohol changed medicine, changed trade, changed social rituals, and also introduced a level of physical and social harm that fermented drinks alone, capped by their natural limits, had never fully produced. Every step of this discovery, from the first person willing to eat rotting fruit, to the first brewer refining beer through pure trial and error, to the first distiller carefully guessing at safe temperatures, came with real risk, paid for by people working entirely without the chemistry we now take for granted. So how did ancient humans figure out that alcohol was something worth drinking? Once again, the honest answer is that they didn't figure it out through insight first. Nature was already fermenting fruit constantly, for millions of years, completely on its own. Humans simply noticed, through animals acting strange around rotting fruit, that something safe and enjoyable was hiding inside a process they hadn't caused and didn't yet understand. That same instinct, notice what nature is already doing by accident, then learn to reproduce and refine it on purpose, is the exact same thread running through a rock bleeding copper in a campfire, and a burning spring hinting at oil buried deep underground. Humans didn't invent these processes. They noticed them, got curious, and refused to stop asking why. There is still more of that same instinct left to explore. Ancient humans didn't just learn to ferment and distill. Somewhere along the way, they also learned to take pulped, mashed, discarded plant fiber, genuine waste, and press it into something thin enough to hold ink and carry ideas across centuries. That story is coming, whenever the moment feels right for it. If this is the kind of question you didn't know you needed answered, you know what to do.